Hello, I'm Simon Whistler. You're watching TopTenzNet, and in the video today, 10 generic product names you didn't realize were actually trademarks. A trademark usually presents itself in the form of a name, a logo, a design, or a phrase with the purpose of distinguishing one manufacturer's products from another. Sometimes, however, when business is really good for a particular brand, or it has a head start over the competition, then that particular brand might just become a proprietary eponym, or generic trademark. This means that if a product develops a substantial market share over the other manufacturers, or becomes well ingrained into the public consciousness, then its brand could replace the name for the entire industry. Xerox may be the most often given example. Xerox is actually a corporation that sells a variety of things, among which are photocopies. But that Xerox machine from your work may not, in fact, be a Xerox machine after all, and Xerox is not alone. Google, Pampers, Tupperware, just another few brands that have achieved this. But while these are fairly well known, there are others out there that are much less so. And the chances are you may never have guessed them to be brand names in the first place. To be fair though, some have since lost their legal protection as trademarks and are now considered to be part of the public domain. Number 10. Dry ice. If you're not familiar with the term, or even what dry ice actually is, you may not be alone. Nevertheless, if you've ever been to a Halloween party, a nightclub, or a theatrical play, and there was some sort of ground-level mist involved, then there's a chance you were close to where dry ice was being submerged in hot water. There are several other means of producing this sort of fog, like liquid nitrogen, for example, but dry ice works almost equally as well, and it's pretty cheap. In any case, the entertainment industry isn't the main business for dry ice. That would actually be refrigeration. Sometimes known as card ice, especially by the British, dry ice is actually solid CO2. Because it's much cooler than regular ice, dry ice makes for a great refrigerant, especially when mechanical cooling isn't possible or needed. This means that you'll oftentimes come across it when dealing with ice cream street vendors or people carrying around organs or other biological samples. Because it doesn't alter quality or taste, dry ice is frequently used to instantly freeze various foods and oils. Firefighters also sometimes use it to extinguish fires, and plumbers utilize it to flash freeze some water pipes. You'll find some in school labs on occasion, or when people try to preserve ice sculptures. You can also use it as bait for mosquitoes, since they happen to love CO2. Dry ice was discovered back in 1835 by the French inventor Adrien Jean-Pierre Theorier, who described it in one of his works. In 1897, an Englishman by the name of Herbert Samuel Elworthy received a patent for solid CO2 and used it to create soda water for his whiskey. But the device he invented was so big and so cumbersome that people rarely used it. It was Thomas Benton Slate, an American businessman, who really took advantage and in 1924 applied for a patent in the US. 1 year later, he founded the Dry Ice Corporation of America and began selling solid CO2 under the trademark of dry ice. The name card ice, the one the British are familiar with, is derived from carbon dioxide ice, and it's also a registered trademark of a UK company. Number 9. Band-Aid. By the 1920s, Johnson & Johnson was already a well-established company that manufactured ready-to-use surgical dressings. They made large, sterile gauzes that were sealed against germs and sold in various hospitals. The fabric itself originated in Palestine, and the name gauze is said to derive from the city of Gaza, an important center of weaving in the region back in medieval times. Nevertheless, Johnson & Johnson's gauzes, which were used solely as dressings, were the first of their kind. An employee by the name of Earl Dixon, who was a cotton buyer at the company, was also recently married to a woman by the name of Josephine. So as it turns out, Josephine, well, she was a bit of a klutz, constantly getting burnt or injured around the house. Nothing serious, mind you, but enough to be a constant nuisance for the newlyweds. Her husband, being in the industry, decided to help, but the surgical dressings Johnson & Johnson were providing were too big for the minor injuries that Josephine was suffering on an almost daily basis. In a moment of pure inspiration, Earl Dixon cut a small square from one of the gauzes and stuck it on one of his wife's fingers with a piece of adhesive tape. Knowing full well that this would not be a one-time thing, he began his own small-scale production of these Band-Aids. He would have them ready around the house whenever he needed one. In order to keep the two adhesive parts from sticking together, as well as to keep the dressing sterile, Earl lined them with some crinoline fabric. The two soon realized that their invention had a potentially huge market, and Earl presented his idea to his boss at Johnson & Johnson. In 1924, Johnson & Johnson introduced their adhesive bandages under the Band-Aid trademark. After several more improvements, and after a genius marketing campaign of giving out an unlimited supply of free Band-Aids to all the Boy Scouts in the country, the adhesive bandage became a common household item across America. To date, Johnson & Johnson estimates they've sold over 100 billion of these things around the globe. And as thanks for his invention, Earl Dixon was given the position of vice president at the company until his retirement in 1957. Number 8. Frisbee. Who would have guessed that the 1970s Frisbee craze began with apple pies? Well, not specifically apple pies, but pies in general. The story begins in 1871 in Bridgeport, Connecticut, when a man by the name of William Frisbee opened the Frisbee Pie Company. His pies became an instant hit with the students from the universities nearby. These pies came on tin plates, which the students then began flinging at each other while yelling Frisbee. Fast forward to 1948 and we have the flying saucer, a plastic version of those tin plates, reinvented by Walter Frederick Morrison and Warren Francione. The new name was aptly chosen as it was less than 1 year after the famed Roswell UFO incident. After the two parted ways in 1955, Morrison sold the renamed Pluto Platter to the Wham-O Toy Corporation. Wham-O, the company behind another well-known trademark, the hula hoop, changed the flying disc's name once again, this time to Frisbee, misspelling its original name in the process. Then in 1967, Ed Hedrick, the company's designer, added a series of raised concentric rings on its surface along with several other features in order to stabilize its flight, and the modern Frisbee was born. Thanks to an aggressive marketing campaign during the late 60s and early 70s, when the company advertised disc throwing as a sport, Frisbees began flying off the shelves, and Wham-O sold over 100 million units by 1977. Hedrick himself came up with Frisbee golf, while some high school students from Maplewood, New Jersey, invented Ultimate Frisbee. Today, millions of people throw flying discs around, although most of them are not original Frisbees. As of 1994, Mattel toy manufacturers are the owner of the trademark after buying it from Wham-O. Number 7. Velcro. According to a 2002 episode from the live-action TV series Star Trek Enterprise, it was actually the Vulcans, an extraterrestrial species who, during the 1950s, anonymously introduced humanity to the wonder technology that is Velcro. Now, after some thorough investigation on our part, it seems that there are some inconsistencies with that particular story. Surprise, surprise. As it turns out, the trademark brand Velcro, as well as the product it represents, the hook and loop fastener, is actually the creation of a Swiss electrical engineer by the name of George de Mestral. And our research also indicated that Star Trek was a work of fiction. Who knew? Anyway, in 1948, while on a hike through the woods, de Mestral began wondering how and why so many burrs clung to his pants and to his dog's fur. On closer examination under the microscope, these burrs revealed their secret. As a means of dispersing their seed, they make use of many tiny hooks that get attached to all sorts of furs and fabrics belonging to unaware passers-by, and thereby they hitch a ride to another place. It is a case of nature being truly extraordinary in its ingenuity. Probably after coming to this same conclusion about nature, de Mestral began working on a fabric that would be able to mimic the same properties as burrs. Initially made from cotton, the fabric proved vastly more effective with the arrival of nylon, and de Mestral patented his invention in 1955. The word itself, Velcro, is a combination of the French velours and crochet, which in English translates to velvet and hook. He then began advertising it as the zipperless zipper, but his idea really didn't catch on with the public at the time. Help finally arrived from the unlikeliest of places, and that would be NASA. You see, NASA used Velcro during the 1960s as part of their space program. Thanks to the positive press that it received, Velcro began being seen as the space-age fabric, and various fashion designers started using it. De Mestral sold the rights to his Velcro company once it became successful, and even though the original patent expired in 1978, the term is still a trademark controlled by the Dutch Velcro company. Number 6. Aspirin. As one of the oldest and most commonly used drugs around the world, aspirin is still one of the most studied even to this day. It is estimated that between 700 and 1,000 clinical trials are performed on it every year. Aspirin is also the first ever anti-inflammatory and pain reliever in history. While not technically aspirin, its active ingredient, salicylic acid, was used as early as antiquity. Various medicines derived from willow and other salicylate-rich plants were found described on scrolls in Egypt more than 5,000 years ago. Even Hippocrates used to prescribe willow leaf tea to women undergoing childbirth. During the 18th and early 19th centuries, various chemists experimented with willow bark and other plants, and slowly but surely they narrowed down the active ingredients. Then, in 1828, a professor of pharmacy at Munich University in Germany was successful at extracting it and called it salicin. Over the following several decades, other chemists discovered that the Spirea almera plant also contained salicylic acid, as well as coming up with better ways of synthesizing it. While working at the German pharmaceutical company Bayer, chemist Felix Hoffmann added an acetyl group to the salicylic acid and created acetyl salicylic acid. This addition reduced the acid's previous irritant properties, and Bayer patented the process. The company then renamed this acid aspirin and began selling it worldwide. Bayer later sold off or lost the trademark for aspirin in many countries. The origin of the name aspirin comes from the letter A, which stands for acetyl, and spir, which comes from Spirea almeria. In 1950, aspirin entered the Guinness Book of World Records as the most commonly sold painkiller in the world. In the many trials it was subjected to since its invention, aspirin was proven to be a great cancer and heart prevention drug if taken regularly. Number 5. Jet ski. Do you or someone you know own a jet ski? Is it a Kawasaki? If it is, then yes, you have a jet ski. If it's not a Kawasaki, then what you or your friend have is a personal motorized watercraft. Yes, jet ski is a trademark belonging to Kawasaki Heavy Industries Limited from Japan, and all other similar products are commonly known as personal watercrafts, even though most other manufacturers have their own trademark names for them. Now, the history behind these personal watercraft goes all the way back to Europe during the 1950s, when various motorcycle manufacturers were looking to expand their markets into other areas. The first name ever given to these vehicles was water scooters, and the British company Vincent produced roughly 2,000 Amanda water scooters. Unfortunately for them, however, the trend didn't really catch on. Over the following 2 decades, other companies like Meeville introduced its nautical pleasure cruiser, but with a similar lack of success. That is when an Australian motocross enthusiast by the name of Clayton Jacobson II designed and created his own version, but a model that would require the rider to stand up. His real breakthrough here, though, was to replace the previous outboard motor with an internal pump jet. During the mid-1960s, he sold the idea to snowmobile manufacturer Bombardier, but it too failed to gather momentum. Jacobson then sold his patent to Kawasaki, which produced its first model in 1973 and renamed it the jet ski. But because it was a stand-up personal watercraft, the jet ski didn't manage to draw in the masses since it was somewhat difficult to maneuver, especially in choppy waters. The breakthrough came several years later when newer models were designed to let pilots sit, thus drastically increasing its stability. Furthermore, it was now possible for 2 people to enjoy the ride instead of just one, and thus the social element was added into the mix. Bombardier later got back into the game, creating their own line of personal watercrafts known as Sea-Doo. In fact, these Sea-Doos are the best-selling watercrafts in the world, surpassing even the jet ski. Yamaha is also on the market with its own Wave Runners, while Honda entered the business in 2002 with the Aquatrax. Number 4. Bubble wrap. This might come as a surprise to many, it certainly did to us in researching this video, but bubble wrap was originally invented to be some sort of high-end wallpaper. Yes, back in 1957, 2 New Jersey engineers by the name of Alfred Fielding and Mark Chevanes began sealing 2 shower room curtains together and trapping air bubbles inside, thus giving their new wallpaper idea its unique texture. Unfortunately, or not, their wallpaper business didn't take off, and they began looking for other possible uses for the idea, including looking into greenhouse insulation. And while bubble wrap does, in fact, have some insulating properties, this new venture didn't pan out well either. Not wanting to give up, Sealed Air Corporation's marketer, Frederick W. Bowers, struck a deal with IBM in 1959 to package their new 1401 computers. And, well, since then they've been making millions of dollars annually. Recently, however, in a move reminiscent of a Bond villain, the Sealed Air Corporation has decided to renounce the original bubble wrap and begin producing an unpoppable version. But even though this seems like something done just for the sake of making the world a little less entertaining and fun, there's some logic behind it. As it turns out, bubble wrap takes up a lot of space when it's in storage, something that's a big problem for many of their customers. The new bubble wrap is shipped and stored completely deflated, thus taking up just 1/15 of the space. Companies that use it can now inflate their bubble wrap on their own when they need it. This is because it no longer has individual air bubbles, but rather rows of bubbles connected to each other that are no longer poppable. Number 3. Dumpster. Without the humble dumpster, our towns and cities would probably be a lot messier than they are today. Over the past 80 years, the dumpster has become a common sight throughout the United States, and many other designs of these front-loader containers, as they are called, have been in use throughout the world. The first time the word dumpster was used commercially was back in 1936, when the Dempster Brothers Company from Knoxville, Tennessee, trademarked this term. The word itself is a combination of the brothers' name, Dempster, with the word dump. and it was used on their most successful front-loading container. The novelty of these garbage containers were their sidearms that allowed another of the company's inventions, the Dempster Dumpmaster garbage truck, to lift them up and dump the contents directly inside. This streamlined the whole garbage disposal process by up to 75% of the original time. Before this, garbage had usually been collected by horse-drawn carts. Now, even though this idea spread throughout most of the world, the actual trademark dumpster didn't. The Australians and the British, we do sometimes call our own front-loader containers dumpsters, but the wheelie bin and skip terms are far more commonly used. Number 2. Mace. When it comes to personal defense, pepper spray, more commonly known as mace, is one of the best weapons to have on your person. It incapacitates without killing or seriously injuring someone, and its backstory is based on the same idea. Chemical mace came into existence in 1965 after Alan Lee Littman, an inventor living in Pittsburgh, alongside his wife Doris, came up with the chemical formula and its means of dispersal. It's important to mention that other similar pepper sprays existed before the Littmans got into it, but they oftentimes fell short, either by accidentally afflicting the sprayer or taking too long to activate and deter the attacker. Prior to starting work on chemical mace, Alan Littman was working on such inventions as the waterless egg cooker and the bacon cooker, but with very limited success. Nevertheless, after one of his wife's friends told him about how she got mugged while coming home from work, they began discussing what self-defense weapons a woman could have at her disposal in such a situation. The two then began experimenting around the house with various chemicals such as kerosene, freon, and sulfuric acid as propellants for aerosol spray cans, as well as a wide variety of irritants. They finally settled on chloroastaphenone, a chemical highlighted by the military as being a potent tear gas during World War II. Initially calling it tear gas aerosol spray, they eventually decided on chemical mace, in reference to the spiked club of medieval times and the effects it had on a person's face, though without the actual physical harm. The two inventors then opened a business known as the General Ordnance Equipment Corporation and began selling their mace to the public. Now, its active ingredient wasn't something new, but the fact that the Littmans managed to repackage a chemical weapon as a civilian product was, and it was a success almost instantaneously. In 1987, Littman accepted an offer from the gun manufacturer Smith & Wesson to buy the company, and he became director of their non-lethal weaponry research division. The active ingredient has since changed to oleoresin capsicum, which is less toxic and has a faster incapacitating property. Number 1. Heroin. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it, and this rings especially true in reference to today's opiate epidemic and the appearance of heroin on the world stage. As most of us know, heroin is a Schedule I controlled substance in the US known in the pharmaceutical industry as morphine diacetate, or simply diamorphine. Diamorphine was first synthesized in 1874 in England, but it took another 23 years before it became popular. Felix Hoffmann, working at the pharmaceutical company Bayer and the aforementioned inventor of aspirin, was looking for a safer and less addictive alternative to morphine. This was happening in 1897, and it didn't exactly work out like he planned. He was hoping to produce codeine by acetylating morphine, but instead ended up creating diacetylmorphine, which is 2 times more potent. The head of Bayer's research department reportedly came up with the name of heroin from the German word heroisch, meaning heroic in English, and implying the drug's strong effects on its user. Bayer then began selling diacetylmorphine under the trademark heroin and marketing it as a safer and non-addictive substitute to morphine, as well as a cough suppressant. Its primary consumers were middle and upper-class women who bought it for their medicine cabinets. It took 17 years before the US government began regulating it, and another 10 years before people realized heroin's actual effects, and the United States banned its sale completely. At the same time, they also banned its importation and the manufacture of it. 1 year after that, in 1925, the Health Committee of the League of Nations also banned it, but it was in 1930 when all of its other analogues were also banned. After World War I, Bayer lost its trademark rights over heroin as part of the 1919 Treaty of Versailles. The US went through 2 major heroin epidemics after that, the first after World War II and the second during the Vietnam War. Today, however, with various opioids being loosely prescribed by doctors around the United States, heroin use has seen a 5-fold increase over the past decade. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below, and do not forget to subscribe for brand new videos just like this every day of the week. Also, check out my new channel and go over there and subscribe. It's called Biographics. You'll find a link to it in the description below. We do biographies of notable people from history and the present day. Check out some of the videos from the archives over there on the right. And as always, thank you for watching.